98, and we are live in Southwest Florida in my studio inside my RV. I live and work full-time with with my kitty baby Bjorn here in the RV, and the dinette here is my studio where I write my books, I film my videos, I write my patterns, I knit and crochet, and where I teach. If you are joining me live, please say hello. Let me know if you're crafting this morning. Let me know if you have questions for me. I did share a link at the beginning of the pre-chat this morning to let you know what I'll be talking about today. I wrote a really lengthy and informative blog post yesterday, and it's been shared here in the live chat multiple times. I will also be sharing it in the video description in the show notes later on, and then in a pinned comment. If you're joining me live though, please say hello. Let's get the party started. Happy Wednesday, happy hump day, everybody. How you doing today? Let's see, we have, hi Judy and Judy, Thea, Ann, Marlene, Lori, Sharon, Judy. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. Hi Martha. Hi Donna, good morning. I have lots of fun things to share with you today, and although it's not doing well, it looks like it got warped in storage. I do have my tabletop, what do you call it, dry erase board, and I think that I like this better than the idea I had to stick one on the wall. So even though this one is on its last legs, I will probably repurchase it because I really like this style, and it turns out it sits very well here on the table. So if you are interested in this, I know it's in my Amazon shop, but I've had it a while, so if it's not available, I'm gonna have to repurchase it anyway, so I'll share the link that I repurchased from. Hello, Lee from Central Florida. Anne says my article had lots of good info. Wonderful. I'm excited to share it with everybody today. Anne, our new Martha likes my hair. Thank you. I did that trick where I pulled the crown of my hair up, tied the headband with just the lower pieces underneath it, and then pulled the top hair on top so that the headband is in and out of my hair. And I left my hair in braids overnight to give myself that, crimped kind of a curl. I'm not sure I like a crimped curl in my hair. I prefer a regular curl, but it's still a fun way to wear a headband and get my hair out of my eyes. Let's see, who else is here? That's wonderful, Lori. She's volunteering to make headscarves from the shawls for sharing for care bags for breast cancer patients. That's amazing, Lori. And I just wanted to remind everybody, when you make things in my patterns or with my older yarns too, that's fine. But when you make things with my patterns, please share them with me in the Share a Project community project section of my website. Here's the link. Every time someone shares a project there, you share what you made, how you made it, any details you want to share about it, and with some photos, and I upload them to my blog and make an article about it. And there's some really amazing inspirational projects in there. It's so nice to see how other people interpret a pattern, because I think it opens up the world of more inspiration when we can see how other people interpret patterns differently than we do. Whether it's picking a different yarn, picking a different color, making any modifications or adaptations, or in the styling. There's so many different ways that we can be inspired by other people's adaptations, which is actually a great segue into what I wanted to talk about today. But let's see. Hi, Marcia and Angela. Yes, Martha, it does make your hair look thicker. That is true. Hi, Melanie. Thank you, Melanie. Judy found the tabletop easel. Wonderful. And I'm definitely going to be repurchasing it because mine's on its last legs, but I love it very much. I loved it before I moved. Obviously, I didn't store it properly since I've moved. It's gotten warped and the Velcro doesn't work anymore, but I love it and I'm going to repurchase it. Hi, Elizabeth, and thank you very much. Lori, I have a whole book on crochet hats. I have a book called 24 Crochet Hats. You can find it on my website. And I have even more, and they're all available as single downloads or they're available as an ebook, or they're available as a PDF book or a paperback book. And if you search crochet patterns by hat, you can find that I have even more hat patterns than the 24 in that book. I think because I believe you're asking specifically for crochet hat patterns. I did release a knit hat pattern yesterday, and we'll be talking more about it tomorrow. But how gorgeous is this? It's with a faux cable. There are no cables in this, and it is so easy to whip up. I used number 6 super bulky yarn and 10mm knitting needles, and starting tomorrow I'm going to do some demonstrations on the show. It might take more than one day. I'm going to show you how to knit this in the round on magic loop technique with a super long set of knitting needles, but you could also knit it on a 16-inch circular, or you could do double point needles. It is so quick. I think it took me about an hour to make the hat, like seriously. It's so quick. Isn't it gorgeous? We'll talk more about that tomorrow. But today, I wanted to talk about that blog post that I wrote yesterday. And let's get back there so I can make sure. I want to do it in order because I want to give respect to all the different ways that you can easily change crochet patterns. So the pattern that I used as an example in the blog post is the Tender Claire crochet vest pattern. And I want to draw it first. Oh, where did I put my dry? I had everything here. Okay, so let's talk about the construction of this pattern first. And I think from there we'll be able to go in a bunch of different directions. Okay, because the first thing you're always going to do is figure out, well, the first thing you're always going to do is figure out yarn. But I know, baby Bjorn's sleeping. He'll be out. Maybe he'll be out. Baby Bjorn! So this is the vest. Okay, and there's an armhole here, and there's an armhole here. Does that make sense? Can everybody see that okay? All right, and this pattern is begun down the center and worked out in this direction, and then you fasten off, and then you come back to the other side of that foundation oval and you work in the other direction. So you start from the center back and work out sideways in each direction, all right? I wanted to mention what we're talking about today, and that's the Tender Claire crochet pattern. It is absolutely beautiful. I am going to remake it, but I wanted to talk about the process of deciding when you're going to make a pattern or remake a pattern. And this is great even if you've made that pattern before. Let's talk about what you can do differently or how you can involve different changes. So the first one is to talk about yarn substitution, right? So anytime you're looking at a pattern and you're going to use a different yarn, whether the yarn is discontinued, the yarn is out of stock, the yarn is out of your budget, the yarn is a fiber that you're allergic to, whatever. There's all sorts of reasons why we choose, or you want to use something in your stash. There's always, always, always reasons to why we consider yarn substitution and not doing exactly what's called for in a given pattern. And so the first thing you want to ask yourself is what weight yarn was used in the original project. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I believe there's a 0 and there's a 7 too, but I don't know about you, but I prefer to stick around a number 3, number 4 a lot of times, unless I'm doing chunky stuff, then I love to go into a 6 too. However, this particular pattern calls for a number 4 worsted weight yarn. So then I'm going to say to myself, okay, what season am I making this for? Do I want it to be 100% wool or alpaca or a super warm animal fiber? Am I making it for summer? Do I want to make it in cotton or bamboo or silk or linen? Or do I want to make it budget friendly and make sure there's some acrylic in there, or maybe do 100% acrylic? And acrylic is something that can be blended with any of those other fibers to bring the cost down, and it is also something that makes it easier to wash and wear. So are you looking for something that you want to be able to put in the washer and dryer? I always recommend avoiding the dryer at any time you can, whether it's for your lingerie, your swimwear, your athletic wear, your shapewear, anything that can be broken out down by that heat. And so like your delicates, your lace, and your handmade items, even if a yarn says that it can be machine washed and dried, that's great practically for like a baby Afghan or even an Afghan, but in general, you will prolong the life of whatever you have made or bought in a store by avoiding the dryer when you can. Just simple as that. That heat is so, in addition, we've talked before about different types of cleaners, different types of soaps, and what to avoid, because if your detergent has bleach and harsh chemicals in it, it will break down your fibers and make them have a shorter lifespan as well. But the dryer specifically, hands down, does the same thing. And I mean store-bought clothes. Doesn't matter. Whatever you put in the dryer is going to have a shorter lifespan than if you didn't put it in the dryer. And I know that's not always practical. Do I put my sheets and my duvet in the dryer every week? You betcha. Do I put my jeans in there every week? Yes, I do. But whenever I can, and whenever I can make it work, I try to not put anything else in the dryer if it's something I want to last. Okay, I'm off my soapbox about the dryer. Okay, so then you pick your yarn, right? And then you pick your yarn, you either buy it or you pull it out of your stash, and then what? Then you've got to make a gauge swatch. Number one, you're switching yarn, so you want to make sure you're going to make it the right size. Number two, we're making a project that we're going to wear on our body, so size does matter. Size does not always matter when you're making a scarf, or you're making an Afghan, or you're making something flat, but it absolutely matters when you're going to wear it on your body, because certain things don't look good if they're not the right size. They could be too big or too small, okay? So, and when you're changing yarn, you have no idea if that fiber content and the loft of that yarn, or the way that it's spun, is going to work up at the same gauge as the original yarn. There's no way to know until you do a gauge swatch. So for this particular example, I bought Brava worsted premium acrylic at Knit Picks, and I bought it in a whole bunch of colors when it was on sale last month. I had some ideas for remaking this pattern. I also had some ideas for using it for another book, which, if you want to see a sneak peek, here's the beginning of Knit Power. I've started some of the swatches for my Knit Power book, and I'm so excited about it. But I digress. That's one of the reasons I bought this yarn. So then a couple days ago, I went to the pattern and I looked up the stitch pattern, and I made a swatch with an H8 or 5mm crochet hook, which you saw the other day when we talked about blocking. And I do have a blog post about that blocking with a really great, with a really great product review about the laundry sheets that I used. And you can see more about the gauge process there also, and I did that on the show. Yes, I happen to like this yarn very much, and I've been talking about that for a few days now. I'm really impressed with the stitch definition. I'm impressed with the softness, especially after blocking. And Judy just shared a link to Knit Picks Brava worsted if anybody wants to check it out. Lots of great colors, great price. Let's see. So I did it in 5mm, and I measured it before blocking, and it was way too small. So then I went, and even though H8 5mm was the hook size suggested, and I was the designer, so I thought it was a pretty close place to start, and it was too small before blocking, so I went ahead and did the swatch in a 6mm hook, and it was closer to gauge. So then I blocked them, and I gotta tell you, they turned out so soft after blocking, unbelievable. Anyway, then once I blocked them, this one is the correct gauge, not the larger one. So I went back to the 5mm, but I did not plan on doing it in this particular color. I just felt like it's one of the colors that I want to dedicate to one of the chapters in Knit Power. And there were other colors that I purchased, so I really wanted to try something else. And one of the colors that I bought was this color called Caution, which is a golden yellow. Like, it's not quite orange. It's still in the spectrum on the color wheel between yellow and orange, but it is definitely softer than orange. It's like a really intense golden yellow. And I thought, what an interesting color. Did I finish saying this? So I decided to go with the 5mm hook. So I felt like I was on track still with the pattern. So then it was about changing the color. And like I said, I was inspired by that color, and I was like, what am I going to do with this color? Like, what color would it go with? What colors would I wear underneath it? And so I originally thought to make the whole cardi wrap in that color and then maybe style it with a really beautiful teal blouse or dark teal blouse, because like that color in teal and that color in like a royal blue would be opposite the color wheel. Let's see if I have a color wheel here. Yeah, so let's see if I can lift this up to show you. So here's that color on the color wheel. Can you see this here? Let's see if I can zoom in. There we go. So as you can see, it's in this tertiary pice right here. It's not quite yellow, not quite orange. It's that golden yellow. And if you look across, we're close. We've got a real nice match with a purple and maybe even a violet or a blue. And then if you go into the thirds, it looks great with raspberry and with green. And so I was leaning towards like a dark teal with it, but then I found this website where I could, so I took a photo of the yarn here, see that? And whoops, and then I went to this website called Color Space, and when I went to Color Space with, I tracked that color in Canva to know what the exact number was of that color, and I entered that color. It's called F0AA4F, okay, but you can color pick on Canva when you have a photo. And so I entered it into there, and I generated all of these color combinations with that golden color. So one was called generic gradient, then matching gradient, and this is the generic gradient up here is the one that I really loved, because it went from that golden yellow to a yellow green to a real green to a teal to a denim blue and then indigo, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I kind of want to try that. And so you can see all the other palettes that it came up with, and there were tons, and I shared all of them in the blog post as well. But what I want to show you next is what I happened to have ordered at Knit Picks that when I made that purchase. So I had bought that golden yellow, which is called Caution, and I bought Avocado, and I bought Pea Pod, which is like a nice grass green. Wait do you see how these colors work out together. And then I bought Hunter, which is like a deeper dark teal, and I bought Celestial Heaven and Celestial Solstice, or Solstice Heather, which is a more of a blue in the blue violet family. And I was starting to see a bit of a gradient here, and maybe even like a Mother Nature inspired palette. You know how I talk about that all the time, where if you're stuck on a on color mixing, think about Mother Nature. So I thought, okay, well, let's call this a sunflower or some other, or a tiger lily or some other really bright orange flower. And then, wow, this looks like not only the leaves, but the way the leaves are highlighted in the sun, the way the leaves are shadowed in the shadows. You know, you get those highlights and shadows when you look at leaves too. And so I thought this might be a really interesting stripe effect. Okay, so now, yes, I used to be a professional model when I was a teenager, for many years actually. So, okay, so I thought, okay, we've got 5 colors here. Let's see what we can do with them. So now I have to look at the stitch pattern. So let's look back at the stitch pattern. Okay, we've got a 3-row stitch pattern here. We have a shell, and then we have like a shell, a second shell, and then we have a row of chain 5 spaces, okay? And I thought if I'm going to do stripes on something like this, I thought it might be interesting to do not only each row separately, but what if I did those 2 rows of the stripe in one color and then that open work row of chain 5 spaces in the second color, right? So even though it's a 3-row repeat, I'm now turning it into a 2-stripe repeat. Does that make sense? And I want to hold here for a second to make sure everybody understands that. Yes, it's a 3-row repeat for the stitch pattern, but I want to change it into not a 3-stripe repeat, but a 2-stripe repeat by doing both of the shell stripes in one color and then the chain 5 space in a second color. but I want to hold here. That's wonderful, Elizabeth. I'm so glad, so glad. Hi, Lashira. I'm drinking water with fresh ginger and fresh lemon today, and oh my God, it's so good. I could drink that by the gallon. Okay, great, Judy. I'm so glad. So here's where, so if you want a deep, I'm going to talk about stripes for a second. And if you want a deep dive on stripes, I wrote a really lengthy blog post about stripes last week. So I'm going to pop a link in the live chat for you to just read later if you haven't read it yet. Okay. And so let's go back to what we talked about in the stripe chapter. If I would do this with just 2 colors, those shells would always be 1 color, and then that chain space would always be a 2nd color. So then it would look like a 2-stripe repeat. Now when you use a different combination of colors to the number of stripes, you get a more random looking stripe. So let's say I did 3 colors for a 2-row stripe. It would be color A for this shell, color B for, what did I say? Did I say 3? Yeah. So color A for this shell, color B for this chain stripe, then color C for this stripe, this shell, and then back to color A for this chain 5 space. So color A was this shell, but then it was this chain 5 space. So you're alternating with more randomness than if you did the same number of stripes as you did the same number of colors. This also works with in divisibles, or I said that wrong. If you did the number of stripes in a number that's divisible by the number of colors, if the number of colors is divisible by the number of stripes, so like 2-row stripe, if you did 4 colors, 6 colors, it'll look more of like a pattern. So it would be color A, color B, color C, then color A, color A, color B. Anyway, I'm off. It'll look more more of a pattern. But if you go into the number of stripes, so I picked 5 colors for that 2-color stripe, and this is what I got. And this is the pattern ends up being this. It ends up being 5 color stripes before it repeats. So the first shell was in avocado. The first chain was in pea pod. The next shell was in hunter, the dark teal. Then the next chain space was in solstice heather, the dark blue. Then this shell is in caution, the golden orangey yellow. Then the next chain stripe is in avocado. Wait a second, we used avocado for the shell down here. It's now the chain stripe up here. Next we did the shell in pea pod. Wait a second, pea pod was the chain stripe down here. It's now the shell up here. Then we used hunter for the chain stripe up here. Hunter was the shell down here. And then we used solstice heather for the shell up here. That was the chain stripe down here. So now as we've done all that, now the next chain stripe will be caution, and then the next shell will go back to avocado. So it's way more interesting when you combine a different number of colors to the number of stripes that you're doing. This would be more busy if I would have changed color at the end of every row. It would have looked more stripy and less motify. I think this is going to look more motify because I kept the shell together in one color. But can you see that? And can you see all the varying differences that I talked about, and how you can get totally different looks? I mean, look at the original pattern is in white. Like, let's look at a photo. Let's look at a photo of this. Let me get a good sized photo going here. How different is this than the original? Look at how different that is than the original. It's amazing. For the person who just said they're confused, anything's confusing the first time you hear it. What's important is to just be open-minded to it, and then go back and read the articles, because when things are written down, they're often more concise and more understandable than when you first hear something for the first time. So even though I like to share this type of stuff live to get interactive questions and answers with all of you, it is really helpful to read the article first, which is why I posted at the beginning of the show, or go back and read it after we've talked about it, and then if you have questions, ask me questions back here in the comments. You can also leave comments on my website too, so you can leave a comment on the blog post. No matter whether you choose to leave a comment there or leave a comment here, you leaving the question, me answering the question, together we're helping everybody else too, because other people read the comments and we're more alike than we are different. So chances are if you have a question, other people have a question as well. All right, and let's go back to, okay, modifying length and width. This is a huge conversation that I get asked about all the time, and that's why we're going to come back to this one here. Okay, so when we made our swatch, we made it lengthwise, right? We work back and forth in rows, and we start our starting chain, or we did foundation ovals, so we start it across here, and then we work back and forth in rows to getting a width gauge, and then getting our height gauge based on our stitch pattern, okay? And this makes sense to a lot of people when we're making garments or projects that are worked from the top down or the bottom up. But once we make projects that are worked side to side like this, what you have to visualize in your head is your swatch like this, okay? Once your swatch is like this, then it helps to understand this construction better. So, with your swatch on the side like this, let's see if I can do both of these at the same time. Would it sit here? No. Okay, so with this here, okay, your foundation ovals are this dotted line here. Working back and forth in rows here is working back and forth in rows towards that side, okay? So now when we talk about modification, the first thing you have to understand is does rows, the width of your stitches and the height of your rows is doing something opposite here than it would if we were just making a top that went from the top or bottom, okay? So if you want to, and then because a cardi wrap is not always a sized project, how do you change the size? So when you see the garment on me and you know my size, you know I'm 5'9", about 180 pounds. If you are significantly shorter or thinner or significantly taller or heavier, there are all sorts of reasons why you may want your cardi wrap to be longer or wider. If you make it longer, it will cover more of your bum, right? If you make it wider in between your armhole openings or narrower in there, it'll fit different sizes. And if you make your sides wider, it'll hang longer in the front, okay? So if you want it longer, based on this side-to-side construction, if you want it longer, increase first row, okay? That first row is set up as foundation oval. So then the next thing you have to ask yourself, well, how many do you have to look at the multiple then. This stitch pattern is a multiple of 3 foundation ovals per repeat. So if you want it longer, how much longer, right? Each of these repeats was 4 inches. So that means you have to increase or decrease based on 3 foundation ovals and based on 4 inches per. So I don't remember how long this is, but let's say it's 20 inches. You have the choice then of making it 16 inches or making it 24 inches or 28 inches. But anytime you change, if you want to change within the pattern, you're going to have to change by the multiple. So it would be a 3 foundation oval, 4-inch increments to change that height, okay? Then to change the width going side to side, then you're going to, okay, so width, increase, and you could substitute increase for decrease depending on if you want it bigger or smaller. Increase number of rows. Okay, so, and if your swatch changed in size between unblocked and a blocked project, you don't want to just measure your work here. You want to measure your rows based on your blocked gauge. Does that make sense? Because that's actually a really important factor too. It is very tempting to measure your work when it's unblocked to see if you're where you need to be. But you are going to make even more mistakes than if you didn't do a gauge swatch to begin with, because it's still going to stretch out when it gets wet because you don't know the proper gauge until you've seen your yarn washed. Okay? How it reacts to water is what determines the gauge. Okay, so if you want more or less width between the armholes, you're going to add more or less rows. It is a 3-row repeat, and it's 2 inches per repeat. So you're going to have to add 3 in multiples of 3 rows and in multiples of 2 inches on either side of the armholes, which means you're going to have 4-inch increments between there, because you have to keep things mirrored on each side. So if this is, let's say it's, I don't know, let's say it's 12 inches between them right now, you could either go to 8 inches, 12 inches, 16 inches, or 20 inches, but it'll always have to be in 4-inch increments. And let's say you want these sections longer. You have to remember that for every, or shorter, for every 3 rows you add or subtract, you're adding or subtracting 2 inches to this side, these sides here, which end up then being the length of the front. I know it's a lot. Yep, all it takes is one mistake, Melanie, and you get it. I understand. Yep, all it takes is one. You know what, Elizabeth? If you've rarely made wearables, then it wasn't always necessary to you. Maybe you didn't always use the same amount of yarn that a pattern called for, and that's one of the side effects of not doing gauge swatches. But if you've never made wearables before, you really didn't get pinged with a huge penalty. When you make wearables and your wearables are not made to gauge, you get this huge penalty of having things that don't fit. And it can be such a disaster for so many different reasons, whether you waste the yarn, waste your time, don't have something to gain out of all the work you put in. But, you know, it depends on what you make. If you don't make things that have to fit, doesn't matter. If you're making dishcloths and afghans, it doesn't matter. But as soon as you want to make something to fit or make something within a specific amount of yarn that a pattern calls for, then it matters. Does anybody have any other questions? There is more to the article. Oh, and then we, in the article, there are even further ways that you can modify this pattern by adding sleeves or by adding edging and so many other different things. And you know, the options are unlimited, just truly unlimited. Ah, all right. Well, there you go, Elizabeth. Now you know why. Does anybody have any other questions? And it's possible that a lot of you didn't read the blog post yet, and that's totally fine. But if this subject interests you, and especially if it confuses you, please go read the blog post and let me know if you have further questions. There's a lot of information in there. I went over a little bit of it here today. I was hoping to be able to answer people's questions about any of the content that I'm sharing, but more than happy to discuss this again when you have further questions. And I think it's just a nice article for you to be able to come back to whenever you're looking to modify a pattern. You can always come back to that article to give yourself that checklist of things that you need to do to make sure that you're having a successful experience at remaking something in a different way, or substituting a yarn, or creating different design elements. There's lots of ways to easily change a crochet pattern, and a lot of this applies to knitting as well. A lot of it does. I just happened to choose crochet to discuss this today. I'm so glad it's interesting, Angela. don't see any other questions. If you, like I said, go read the post. If it interests you, great. If it doesn't interest you, that's fine too. If it confuses you, ask me questions. Share, if you know of anybody else that might be interested in any of this content, share this video, share the blog post, share any part of it. It helps me for sure to be able to teach more people and grow my audience, but it's also really helpful information for other people as well. So always feel welcome to share my content if you think it's things that your friends or your family might be interested in. And a quick reminder, tomorrow we're going to talk about magic loop knitting to make this gorgeous, gorgeous chunky hat, which is so pretty. And if you've never done magic loop, you're gonna love, even if you're not a knitter, it looks like magic, and I think you're gonna love it anyway. And maybe it'll entice you to pick up a knitting needle. Who knows? Anyway, thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend a few minutes here with me. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed everything we talked about, chatting with me and everyone else. Let us make time to create, share, and inspire today and every day. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.